So I want to start with an article in The Guardian that is about Israel's starvation campaign in Gaza. We know that for the last over 60 days, Israel has imposed a total siege on Gaza. Not a morsel of food, not a drop of water, not any medicine has entered Gaza for this time because Israel is intentionally trying to starve the Palestinian people in Gaza to death. And the outcry that should be there in response to this policy has unfortunately not been present. And instead, we've seen, while Israel accelerates its means and methods of destruction and killing and extermination, we've seen an inverse reaction. I don't know if it's fatigue. I don't know if it's that other things are happening. But I can tell you that I remember very clearly that in the beginning of the genocide, there was much more in terms of state reaction. Like we saw countries expelling their Israeli ambassadors, cutting all ties with Israel, making clear and tangible changes in their policies. And I feel like that, unfortunately, instead of increasing with time and with urgency and with the continued impunity for Israel's international crimes, instead of that increasing as it should, I feel like it's only gotten less and less. But the urgency is now because Israel is intentionally starving Palestinians in Gaza to death. And that's what is the topic of this, what I thought was a very, very helpful and powerful op-ed in The Guardian. So it's called Israel is Starving Gaza. It's a cheap, silent, and brutal way to kill. It's written by Ahmed Moore, and I'd like to share some passages from it. He starts by saying, I recently looked up the biography of Rudolf Höss, the commandant who led the Auschwitz prison camp in Poland during the Second World War. He was fastidious in his duties. He successfully oversaw the extermination of millions of people from 1940 to 1943, and according to accounts, seems to have been a father who cared for his 5 children. His home life was imagined and captured by the filmmaker Jonathan Glazer in his 2023 movie, The Zone of Interest. John Primomo recounts in his biography how the Nazi would randomly select groups of prisoners and sentence them to die by starvation. Höss was eventually captured by Nazi hunters and hanged for his crimes, in his case a slow death, on a short gallows. Yoav Gallant, the former Israeli defense minister, is the primary architect of the starvation policy in Gaza, which is unfolding as I write. The International Criminal Court, of course, has issued a warrant for his arrest, indicating reasonable grounds to believe that Mr. Netanyahu and Mr. Gallant bear criminal responsibility for starvation as a method of warfare. Gallant's successor, Israel Katz, has embraced the Gallant policy. He and his boss, Netanyahu, broke the ceasefire in March, and since then they have worked fastidiously to starve the people in Gaza. Unable to stand idly by, a group of activists, including Greta Thunberg, organized the Freedom Flotilla, a boat carrying supplies meant for Gaza. Their goal was to break into the 139 square mile prison camp, as Gaza is described. On May 1st, their boat was attacked by and disabled by drones, according to eyewitnesses. A reasonable person may assume that the Israelis destroyed the boat. He goes on to describe how starvation is attractive for mass murderers because it is cheap, because it doesn't require any big outlays. You impose a siege and human biology resolves the rest. Because starvation makes little noise. For those who seek to silence their victims, as Israel has done by murdering 155 Palestinian journalists, starvation serves as a useful tool. There are no bomb craters, no burning children. There are only emaciated corpses, and 18 months into the darkness that has enveloped the Palestinians, this doesn't warrant very many headlines. And despite its advantages, starving humans to death is evil, not least because of how it works. And then he goes on to describe what it's like for a human being to be starved to death. For me, it's highlighting something really essential, which is that It's true that on certain days, Israel is killing 100 or more people in Gaza. Like on Wednesday, 2 days ago, they killed over 100 people in Gaza. The next day, they killed like dozens of people in Gaza. That isn't really, I mean, that gets reported on, yes, maybe a little bit, but certainly not as much as it would in the beginning. But the starvation, which is affecting every single person in Gaza, doesn't get the attention that it warrants, doesn't get the urgency that it warrants in terms of the discussion, in terms of dominating headlines. Not only is it silent in terms of the way that it actually kills people, but it's also silence. You also see that silence reproduced in the way that the conversation is almost absent from the public discourse. And that's deeply troubling because the situation today is the worst that it's ever been in the last year and a half. There hasn't been a worse time for the humanitarian situation. I know right now that people in Gaza are buying spoiled flour and they're using it to make bread anyway. And reports are that they can't even eat the bread because the flour is simply unusable, but that's all they have. So they use it and make bread anyway, and then they try to eat it. And sometimes they can, and sometimes they just can't. It's just so foul. There was a great article in Mondo Weiss that described the daily routine of a father in Gaza, like in the last couple of days. And he described how he was just consumed by waking up and the immediate search for water. And only after he found water would he then move on to the next task, which was to find food. And he described in painstaking detail all the things that he went through to try to get food, to try to find food, to try to find out who had food and who had it in, that he could afford it and where he would have to go get it. And, if he had to go or if he had to send someone and leave his kids. And he basically just said the entire day is consumed by these two tasks, finding water and finding food. And some days you don't find it. And so you go to bed and you wake up the next day trying to see if you can find it the next day. And he describes how it's become normal now for families to go 1, 2, sometimes 3 days without eating, and how it's difficult for families to even imagine, their life going back to a time or a situation where this isn't the reality. And that's, that's of course deeply, deeply, deeply troubling. But the question is, where's the urgency? Where's the outcry?
I heard a story of a young boy, a child, who was like carrying water every day, and that ripped his shoulder blades. Like his literal body could not support the weight of carrying water every day. And it's just such a it's so sadistic to think that this child's entire existence has been reduced to hauling jugs of water, like that are just literally too much weight for him to bear. Like it's not even a metaphor. The water jugs, which are being withheld by the Israeli apartheid regime, by the criminal thugs, are depriving this child of what the entire Gaza Strip, the entire Palestinian people of water. And this child, instead of like playing soccer or developing like an interest in art, is forced to simply just carry water for his hopefully family. You know what I mean? Like who even knows? And yeah, the literal weight of the water, it was too much for him to bear. And then it's like, you think about it, there's not even like proper medical treatment for what he needs, right? He can't get the proper care that he needs from the injury he sustained from the genocide. It's not a missile, but it it's definitely, it registers with his life, right? Changes the course of the trajectory of his life for sure. His immediate, like, it's just it's so sinister on every single level. Like, we should all be literally furious that this is allowed to happen every single day.
I was talking to my aunt, who is a genocide survivor and came to the US 6 months into the genocide and was forced to leave her grandchildren in Gaza. And she was telling me how all of the young kids that she left, they were young kids when she left. She said they're grown men now. Not because they grew up, not because like the time has passed, but because like the innocence has been taken away from the children. She said they're all grown men now, like these little boys that, were 7, 8, 9, 10, whatever. She said they're grown men because they spend their days getting water for the family, waiting in lines, dealing with how to advocate for yourself amongst scarcity and trying to like get the water. I mean, we've all seen the images of the children like queuing for food at the kitchens, the soup kitchens, the communal kitchens, and holding the pots and the pans that are empty and just trying to like get anything for their families. That doesn't, that's not something a child should be doing. A child shouldn't have that pressure on them of, I need to fill this up or my family doesn't eat. And then if we don't eat, we die, and that will remove like your innocence and your childlike wonder that you should have at that age. And that's the point.
The children are literally starving. There are children already literally starving
Yes.
to death.
And they have been for years.
There was, my friend Afif is in Gaza right now, and he just did an interview with Breakthrough News, and he said everybody is really skinny here. Like, you can tell that the hunger is having a tremendous impact across everybody, and especially on the children.
Yeah, it's just one of the means of torturing like an entire people, right? It's one of the methods of mass torture. Like, that's how I see it. And there's many ways that they torture Palestinians in the genocide. And the starvation is one of the ways because of the scenes that it produces. Like, it produces the scenes of young children going to look for water, the young children being cramped to death. Like, there have been children that have been stampeded to death while they're waiting in line for food. There are children who go to get food and then they come back empty-handed, and it happens days in a row. That's one of the means of torture. I read something also recently by a Palestinian writer who's been sharing a lot and blogging a lot about her experience in this genocide. If you guys want to follow her, she's on Twitter. Her name's Iman Bashir, and her @ is @sometimes poo, Pooh. So she wrote, many friends, Aya among them, she's responding to a tweet of her friend named Aya. And she's saying, many friends, Aya among them, confirmed that Israeli artillery units deliberately play piano music after bombing raids. It's not random. It's psychological warfare, a calculated effort to stitch music, something that should mean safety, softness, life, into the memory of genocide. Imagine growing up where that universal language of tenderness is forever fused with the sound of falling buildings and screaming kin, where the soft notes of a piano don't soothe but haunt because they came right after the explosion that took your neighbor, your brother, your leg. How do you hear a piano again without flinching? How do you separate melody from murder when both arrived in the same moment dressed in smoke and debris? It's not about killing bodies. It's about colonizing memory too.
The Zionists are DJing the Holocaust.
It reminds me, like, we heard things like the crying babies sounds and the drones, that would attract people to go look for the baby. And then the people who came to help the baby that they heard crying would be bombed. Like that was a technique that we heard over and over being reported by eyewitnesses, people who survived it, people who described it. There's things like that where you're like, the purpose of this is just torture. There isn't another purpose. It's just another means of torture of an individual or of a group of people. And we know what the point of it all is, right? The point of it is, in the long run, to drive as many people out of Gaza as possible.
The Yemeni army, the armed forces of Yemen, have completed a substantial tactical victory over the United States Navy. They have forced Donald Trump and the naval carrier that was based in the Red Sea to retreat and seek a truce after basically just like 6 weeks of skirmishes between the people of Yemen and the U.S. Navy. The U.S. Navy accidentally, according to them, lost 2 fighter jets valued at $64 million per jet. And they say that the fighter jets just whoopsie fell off the back of a carrier, nothing to see here, no big deal. But what probably
that sounds pretty realistic.
So the thing about it is it doesn't, and literally everybody in the world with eyes, ears, and a brain is looking at that story and thinking, hey, there's probably something else there.
I can't imagine what Twitter was like.
Twitter was having a field day because the United States Navy basically tried to tell everybody they lost 2 fighter jets because they made a hard right turn, avoiding Yemeni fighter drones. Twitter space went wild with a hard right turn. Even like the Chinese military did drills mocking the US military. But yeah, so anyways, what probably happened is that Yemen has been launching a variety of aerial attacks using drones against the US Navy, who has been trying to break the Yemen-backed blockade, who is obviously doing the blockade of the Red Sea in support of Palestine and the Palestinian people being genocided by the Israelis. So the U.S. Navy steps up and Yemen hits them with a mollywop of drones, basically, and hits their U.S. naval carriers and fighter jets as they are landing. So as they're landing on the tarmac and as they're taking off. John Elmer at the Electronic Intifada has been reporting on this a ton. Yeah, so that's probably how the fighter jets were lost instead of a hard right turn. But also, the United
those
States
hard right turns, though.
No, for real. Especially in the open ocean, it's just, really difficult. We're all nautical people, right? We all understand that you have a fighter jet on the back of your boat. Sometimes during spring break, you do a little whoopsie and you lose a fighter jet valued at $64 million. It's extremely understandable.
Which of us has not lost a fighter jet?
I'm saying, who among us? Yemen has bases, military bases, inside of the mountains. And so the Israelis and the Americans can't even hit it. The United States has been bombing Yemen indiscriminately, but they've been bombing hospitals, they've been bombing energy sectors, they've been bombing ports, right? They have not been bombing anything that resembles a military target. Do we see a similarity here? And, obviously the people of Yemen are being murdered for this political situation, but they have responded with just unyielding support to the Palestinian people. They are marching in the millions week after week, right? Screaming, we will not abandon Gaza. And so, yeah, they actually managed to negotiate with the United States and cut a separate deal. So this is one of the first times that the United States has ever cut a deal that didn't include Israel, right? So what happened is the United States
negotiated with Yemen
behind their back. Right. So anyways, yeah, it's all unfolding very quickly, but it's exciting because Yemen basically forced the United States to back off, to back down. And so, you
And
saw
to
Trump,
do a
he
little
gave a little,
diplomacy, like,
yeah. But
which we
Yemen, the
love.
deal
We love
doesn't cover.
diplomacy.
We love to see diplomacy. Anyways, Yemen
Yeah.
deal does not cover Israel. So Israel is still liable for attack. Yemen launched a few ballistic missiles. One actually made contact with the Ben Gurion airport. You saw Donald Trump, he gave a little speech where he was like, the people of Yemen, you know what I mean? Like the dedicated people. Like he did the whole song and dance because he had to bend the
Dedicated.
knee. Yeah,
Did he
he
call him
spoke very
dedicated?
highly of the people of Yemen. He was like,
Oh,
we hit them very hard, like he talked about because they basically just bombed women, children, and like men
right.
responding, the first responders, and he was like, we basically bombed them indiscriminately and they did not back down. So like they're very, they could take a beating is what he said about them. See that the splinters are showing, right? Like there is a real issue where like this has never happened before. This type of negotiation that doesn't cover, like, I don't think they're going to abandon the Israeli apartheid regime ever. I think, as I said, they're going to continue to like send weapons until the very end, until there's like 3 or 4 of them just like held out in a bunker. But I think that this is I think this is a important shift, right? Where we're seeing the U.S. back down and not cover for the Israeli apartheid regime in negotiations.
No, but also one thing you can always count on Trump to be is like unpredictable. He's rash, he's rash. I don't know what the word is. He's he makes.
He's probably got a rash. You know what I mean? Come on. All we can say is it is a huge victory for the people of Yemen and their steadfastness to the cause of Palestinian liberation. There are only a few nations who have really put their, economies and their lives of their people on the line, and Yemen is atop of the list. So shout out to the people of Yemen. The people of Yemen literally had bombs drop on them, and they said, good, thank you for bombing us because that's one less bomb you could drop on the people of Gaza. You know what I mean? Like, that's the sentiment coming out of Yemen. I have a news update about BDS. USF divests from defense companies tied to Israel after pressure from students. This article was written May 2nd by Matthew Green in PBS, NPR, KQED. The University of San Francisco this week announced plans to divest from 4 U.S. defense companies that have contracts with the Israeli military, a rare win for the pro-Palestinian student activists in the campus divestment movement. Wow, what a shade to the BDS movement from Matthew Green, who said rare win. You know what I mean? We have many wins. We have multiple wins. How dare you, Matthew? Matthew? Fuck you talking about? Anyway, continuing. The school's endowment fund will sell off its direct investments in Palantir, L3 Harris, and GE Aerospace and RTX Corporation by June 1st, the university confirmed. The 4 companies, which provided weapons technology and military intelligence tools to Israel, had been specifically targeted by student activists. Quote, after several months of careful consideration, the University of San Francisco is updating the policies that shape its investment practices and making changes to its endowment holdings. USF spokesperson Kelly Sampson told KQED in an email. These decisions were reached with the input of the USF's socially responsible task force made up of a representative group of students, faculty, and staff. Quote, moving forward, the university's endowment, valued at about $566 million, will be exclusively invested in index funds or other commingled funds in which it is not possible to make individual security selections, Sampson said. Anyways, so shout out to the SJP and folks who organized that up there, the Bay Area organizers, everybody who was involved in that divestment campaign. That is a huge win. Another one bites the dust. And another one gone, and another one gone. Another one bites the dust. I used to have a teacher who would sing that every time she caught somebody cheating. She was diabolical. She would literally see somebody cheating, and she would start singing on the way to their desk, and then she would take their test, and she would rip it up right in front of everybody, and she would say, "You failed."
Oh my God, that's so
Yeah.
cruel.
In an overwhelming majority, Norway's largest trade union votes to boycott Israel. This is actually May 9th. This is fresh, hot off the press. The Norwegian Confederation of Trade Unions, the country's largest labor federation, has voted in favor of a comprehensive boycott of Israel. The decision was passed with an overwhelming 88% majority during the Labor Federation's National Congress. This is huge. Resolution means that LO now requires that the state pension fund abroad, Norwegian companies, and financial institutions withdraw from companies that contribute to the Israeli occupation. The resolution shows strong support for the LO's 1 million members to introduce boycott, divestment, and sanctions. The Al-Qassam Brigade spokesperson said, quote, "It highly values the decision by the Norwegian Confederation of Trade Unions to boycott the Zionist occupation and ban trade and investment with its companies," end quote. The movement said it considers the move, quote, "a courageous step that aligns with truth and justice and a victory for the rights of the Palestinian people," end quote. The Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine, as well as the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, also welcomed the decision and urged labor unions to escalate the boycott. The DFLP called for pension funds, companies, and financial institutions to refrain from investing in firms complicit in occupation, end quote. While the PFLP said in the move, quote, "confirms the Zionist entity's increasing international isolation after its genocidal crimes in Gaza and the West Bank," end quote. This is from a Unity of Fields article about a revolutionary in the United States who was a part of a radical movement during the time of the Black Panther Party. They are all over the world, anti-colonial struggles included in that. Just look at Africa, Mozambique, South Africa, Namibia, Angola. To us, these third world national liberation struggles were a cutting edge of resisting and fighting back against U.S. imperialism as it spread throughout the world. Each one of these groups that liberated itself was going to weaken U.S. imperialism to some degree, and our role, in part, was to be supportive of those struggles. International solidarity, if you need a term for it. That was how we considered ourselves. They're the vanguard. We're the rear guard. The rear guard because we're in the belly of the beast. We're the US. We have some responsibility politically, morally, personally to do something, to attack the same system that's being attacked by these revolutionary movements. It's a unique position to be within the US and to try to fight it as well.
That's very relatable. I have always felt that as a Palestinian-American, an intense responsibility, not like a burden, but just sort of an opportunity, knowing what I know and having, the passion for justice in Palestine that I have, and then understanding that I have like a unique position with access to an American audience in a certain way that maybe some people on the ground don't have, and maybe some do, and some definitely do. But just the ability to be able to speak to Americans and say, is this really what you want your tax dollars to be doing? Like, isn't there a better way to spend this money instead of starving children in Palestine? And I think it's been one of my biggest motivations that, I have to say something to try to dismantle the unjust system from my position, knowing that I can only do what I can do, which is I can speak. That's all I can do. A little bit more good news. A judge has ordered the immediate release of Raa Osterk, the Tufts student detained by ICE. She spent 6 weeks in an ICE detention facility, and she was released on May 9th, 2025. So a federal judge ordered her release, saying that the Trump administration's targeting of her could chill the speech of, quote, millions and millions of non-citizens. Remember that Secretary of State Marco Rubio had revoked her visa, saying that her continued presence in the U.S. was contrary to American foreign policy interests. And it was part of course, a wave of similar visa terminations that were targeting students who had criticized Israel or joined protests in support of Palestinians and against the genocide in Palestine. I read some articles that described how she was when she was released. She put her hand over her heart and she was thanking all of her supporters. And this came after she had attended the court session, which lasted several hours the day before, and apparently took a couple of breaks because she was having difficulties with her asthma. She described how her health had deteriorated in experiencing detention for several weeks. And, I can only imagine what that must be like on your physical health, on your mental health, and just the range of emotions that she must have felt while she was experiencing that. It's an experience that I think she'll carry with her for the rest of her life and is deeply traumatizing. Of course, we know that this release only pertains to her immediate confinement. The Trump administration will continue to wage efforts to deport her, but that will carry on in immigration court. So, pending the outcome of the immigration matter, she at least has been returned back to her family and friends and is able to go back to her school and, take back up her daily life while she's waiting the outcome of the immigration matter. It should also be added that the Justice Department vehemently resisted her release. They argued that the judge had no authority to order her release. They didn't present any substantive arguments other than to say that the judge just didn't have any authority. And I think that speaks to the way that the administration is really trying to deal with a lot of these cases. When you look at the cases, there's really nothing there on the substance. Every article is reminding that she hasn't been charged with a crime. Every article is reminding that all she did was write an op-ed. Every article is reminding that they don't have anything to say about her. And it's just all about these massive shows of power and violence, and then trying to use arguments about, this judge doesn't have this authority. You can't do this in accordance with the procedure, to try to keep the oppression going. And I think that just speaks to how weak all of it is, really. So I'm really happy for her that she's released. And I hope that this will continue in terms of everyone who's been caught up in this massive wave of state repression.
The Newark Mayor was arrested after protesting at an ICE facility on May 9th, 2025. Newark Mayor Ross Baraka has been released from custody after he was arrested outside Delaney Hall ICE Detention Center, a spokesperson confirmed. He said, quote, "The reality is this: I didn't do anything wrong." The mayor said he could not speak about his case, citing a promise he made to lawyers and the judge. He voiced full-throated support for everyone living in his community, immigrants included. Quote, "All of us here, every last one of us, I don't care what background you come from, what nationality, what language you speak," Baraka said. Quote, "At some point, we have to stop these people from causing division between us." So yeah, the government giveth and taketh away at the same time. It's sort of like how the Zionist entity will kidnap people directly after they've released somebody, right? They just did the exact same thing here and then took the mayor. And luckily, because he's politically connected, he's out already, but there are thousands of people who are languishing in ICE detention centers. The United States has been sending people on death flights, even including during the Biden administration. I feel like everybody thinks that it started like yesterday, but the Biden administration was sending children, Haitian children, on what were called death flights. because they were so likely to be killed or to die after they landed. And so that is still happening to thousands of people who don't have the political connections of a New Jersey mayor. So we should all be putting our focus on dismantling ICE and resisting the forced disappearance of people who have very mild political opinions. Folks, that's been another episode of the Palestine Pod. Thank you all so much for listening. Check out our full episodes at www.palestinepod.com. Follow us on Instagram at The Palestine Pod. Send us an email at palestinepod@gmail.com. And please consider supporting us on Patreon, www.patreon.com/PalestinePod. That has been another episode of the pod. Thank you all so much for listening. Have as good a day as you can.